contract with Alma Baker, William secured 200 acres of land at Batu Gajah.
Like most planters, he went into coffee. However, from 1896 onwards, the coffee boom had passed its peak.
Brazilian coffee became very popular, and Brazilian coffee practically killed our coffee.
From 1898 onwards, most planters had switched to the new plantation crop, rubber.
That was possible only because at the turn of the 20th century, America discovered the pneumatic tire for the use of motor vehicles. It so happened that rubber was the raw material needed for America to produce pneumatic tires.
Over the next 5 years, he added more and more land to his estate from concessions granted from the local governor. He planned to mine tin from land acquired along the Kinta River, but lacked the capital for expensive dredging machinery. His rubber plantations generated enough income to get by on, but William was not satisfied with his progress. Fate took a morbid turn when, after returning to Scotland to visit his dying mother, he met his future wife Agnes, heiress to a substantial cotton fortune. Charmed by the dashing young plantation owner, they married quickly and returned to Malaya together to start a family. But Agnes was unhappy with William's wooden house, as temperatures would reach almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the afternoons. When she fell pregnant, the need for more suitable accommodation became a priority.
At that time, Kellie Smith clearly saw an opportunity in his wife having financial resources from a substantial expectation of a future inheritance of $300,000. And so, in 1904, he arranged with a firm in Singapore to advance her $24,000 a year for 3 years for the development of Kellie's estate until the trustees released the money.
Although it is unclear who he hired to design the castle, the architects might well have been the same as the Secretariat building.
Jenkins, good to see you, my man. Do have a seat.
Always a pleasure, Mr. Smith.
Jenkins, I've been poring over your plans. They're splendid.
Oh, thank you very much, sir.
I particularly like the airy, cloistered passageway. Splendid.
I'm particularly fond of that myself, yes.
This would be no ordinary design. A manor house fit for a king, complete with stately grounds and secret passageways. William Kellie Smith was a man who dared to dream.
The first thing he did was to build the new Kellie's house in solid brickwork, modelled on the Federal Secretariat in Kuala Lumpur.
Kellie's house was renowned throughout the Kinta Valley and beyond for its unique architecture, a creative blend of styles complemented by some surprising innovations.
I am standing in Glass House, William Kellie Smith's original family home. That it was substantially built, you could still see the base of these thick walls. His belief was to have thick walls to insulate against tropical heat. To assist the heat protection, he has introduced a passageway in the form of a veranda.
This was necessary for Agnes' health and that of the newborn baby Helen, who was born in 1904, as the thick walls of the house gave some insulation against the tropical heat and meant that they could live on their estate instead of spending their time on the cooler hill stations of Maxwell Hill in Taiping or Kledang Hill in Manglembu, near Ipoh.
What strikes me, being an architect, is the fascinating way Kellie Smith has combined various architectural styles. For instance, at the top of the wall, there's a trio of pointed Gothic arches in the inside, but masking it on the outside are Mughal pointed arches, showing that he has actually physically married two different architectural styles. Most interestingly, is the window you see with the step heads. This was a style popular with the Art Deco style of architecture which came into this country in the 30s. So this was 20 years before its arrival. At the top is a rectangular opening which would have led up to the roof of the passageway surrounding the courtyard, which eventually would have led to Kellie's Castle.
Then in 1905, they received bad news. The trustees of the inheritance would only release the funds in 1908. Not only that, but the Singapore financier could not continue advances due to non-performing loans in Indonesia. Kellie Smith had no choice but to turn to the government for help in a letter written by Agnes to the local British government representative of Perak in September 1905. In the letter, Agnes asked for a loan of £50,000, but the authorities were only willing to grant them a fifth of that amount. As a result, William had no alternative but to sell 2/3 of his estate just to stay afloat. To add insult to injury, William had his tin mining concession cancelled when inspectors found no dredging activity on the site.
Kellie Smith was incensed at the attitude of the colonial bureaucracy, but the government authorities were adamant that no more than $10,000 be granted as a loan. The Kellie Smiths were in a quandary. They had recently lost horses and cattle to disease, and they still had to work their estate.
By the time the inheritance was released, their grand plans for a vast tin mine and rubber estate had all but vanished. Suspecting that snobbish bureaucrats had been sceptical about Agnes's inheritance, William was determined to prove them wrong. The castle was thus conceived by William as not just a statement of wealth to be admired. He envisioned it as the playground of the local elite, whose acceptance and approval he so desperately craved. The Kellie Smiths were active socialites and were well known by other colonialists in the Batu Gajah area.
They were among the top 10% of Kinta society. And actually, Kinta society was actually a brilliant society because, remember, there was a tin boom in Kinta and followed by a rubber boom. So many of the residents in Kinta were millionaires and they entertained very lavishly. And the Kellie Smiths were actually one of the top among the top 10% of Kinta society, and they entertained almost regularly. Well, they would entertain their own sort of colleagues, you know. If they were miners, they would entertain other miners, or planters would entertain other planters. But most desirable people who could come to their parties were actually the government officials. If the district officer of Kinta came to one of their parties, it would be considered a success, and they would be accepted as part of the elite of Kinta society.
William was a committee member of the Batu Gajah Gymkhana and was commonly seen hobnobbing amongst city councillors and other plantation owners.
With the arrival of Agnes' inheritance in 1908, William had grand visions for his estate. In Britain, in the Victorian era, it was fashionable for young, rich and enterprising gentlemen to build large manor houses, castles and estates. And for a long time, such practices were fashionable and well admired by the community. Thus it was that in tiny Batu Gajah in Perak State, William Kellie Smith was to have the only private castle in the country.
A month after the initial survey of the ruins, Mr. Chen is ready to present his designs to Dr. Ho at the castle grounds.
Good that you can come.
Yes.
Something like to show you. Here are some of the first attempt at reconstruction. What would have happened had you finished the castle?
All right.
Huh?
Yes.
The corner tower, as we assume,
Yes.
would have had an onion dome. The dome doesn't just come up from a flat roof. It will be surrounded by some decorative balustrade and even have spikes on the side like this one, you see, these pedestals were ready to take these pinnacles. These are good, except they may have been a little bit more slender, like needles, because the stumps are already there, you can see.
All right.
But that is what happens with a roof parapet. You see, you don't just see a flat roof. There's always a transition between the roof line and the sky. You know, one of the burning questions I always wondered was, where would be the main entrance to the completed complex, the castle and glass house? Both of them were in use together. Right. So one possible entrance would be from this side, where there's a remnant, I think, of a fountain, right?
Fountain.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a very common feature to have your circular drive with some feature in the middle, like a fountain, and you come through the porte cochere, where people get in and out during bad weather in the dry, and this road would have led up to the archway in the forest, which would have been the main route along drive through the estate to this point. Unless you excavate a lot around the grounds, you cannot prove anything where one structure was or another part of the structure was. So the best we can do is still speculate and guess.
The foundations and brickwork could be completed by existing workers, but the intricate finishing he was looking for posed his biggest problem.
Well, we don't have the craftsmen here in Malaya to really do the job. We may have to go overseas.
Jenkins, I have a solution. We have to go to India. We have to import skilled craftsmen, sculptors and plasterers. Can you arrange?
I'll get my best man onto it, sir.
Jenkins, I know I can rely on you.
We'll do our best, sir.
Go to it, Jenkins.
It had taken him years to reach this point, but on the verge of his dream, world events took a tragic turn. World War I erupted in Europe in 1914, and the wave of aggression had spread to the Far East. The logistics of sourcing the materials were now made more difficult, sea voyages slower and more dangerous, and the routes from Malaysian seaports to Perak cumbersome and expensive.
Capital was actually frozen in many ways. They couldn't get money to do many of the things that they wanted, and so actually work on the castle stopped for some time. They had to grow food, Actually, First World War, they had to be self-sufficient. All the estates were encouraged to plant food, so instead of just rubber alone, you see. So many of the workers were actually diverted to other occupations.
The estate was not yet half built when in 1915 Agnes gave birth to their second child and heir to the estate, a son they named Anthony. The birth of Anthony gave new and increased impetus to the building's construction. But yet another global tragedy was to strike and further frustrate Smith's plans. The worldwide Spanish flu pandemic spread rapidly from Europe to all continents and was by far the most virulent pandemic in modern history. An estimated 17 million people died in India alone, 5% of India's population at the time. With the high levels of trade and the continued arrival of immigrants from the subcontinent, Smith's workers and craftsmen were inevitably exposed to the ravages of the disease. The sad consequence was the deaths of many of Smith's estate workers, and devastatingly, the deaths of all his skilled masons, plasterers and tilers, specially imported from India.
A sad irony is that while India was one of the sources of inspiration for his dream and creation of his castle, it also contained the seeds of his downfall after the dedication of so much time, money and resources.
Construction came to a halt on the castle site, and given the sad fate besetting the project, the surviving Indian workforce insisted that the gods be placated.